All right, welcome everybody. I'm Nancy Enright. I'm the director of the University Corps, and this is a collaborative effort with the Corps working with Catholic Studies, the Immaculate Conception Seminary School of Theology, and the Law School. And we're really, really excited about this event. One of the things that I was thinking about on the way to work today is that the only answer to hate or to lies is truth and love. And the people that we have speaking today all represent truth and love. And I'm very grateful that we have them here with us today. Father Bill Reilly, who's going to be our keynote, is going to be formally introduced by our president, Monsignor Joe Reilly. And I don't think they're related, but maybe back in the day, back in Ireland or something, they were at some point, but we have two Reillys. But we have asked Father Bill Reilly to also give our opening prayer, and then he will be formally introduced by Monsignor Reilly, our president. So would you open for prayer?
They say you should applaud after the talk, not before, but it's prayer, so we can praise God through prayer. I was in a parish where they said, as they just told you, turn off your pager, your beeper, your telephone, and your pacemaker. I said, no, leave the pacemakers on. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Lord God, be present to us as we gather here this morning. We are living in the Jubilee year, called by our late Pope Francis, who asked that it may be for everyone a moment of genuine personal encounter with the Lord. He called this a year of hope. Let us pray. Lord, do not let us close our eyes to the dramatic situation we are now encountering all around us, not only in certain parts of the world, but in our own community. People in our communities, Lord, are suffering from fear. We, with them, ask, what will tomorrow bring? May it be a time of hope and prayers. We pray for those suffering from fear, for hate, from discrimination. May we spend this time today becoming more aware of the needs of your people to know your presence in their lives. We ask you to bless the panel, the university community that calls us together, the students and faculties who join with us, expressing our dependence upon you and our solidarity with those in need. We ask this as always in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Thank you so much, Father Bill. Appreciate it. And before I just read the formal welcome to everybody, I just want to say on behalf of Cardinal Tobin, who wanted to be here, he just left last evening for Rome, for the Pope's funeral, and for the conclave, obviously. But they had to clear his schedule, whatever, for a couple of weeks, and I'm sure there were some things he said that he didn't mind not being present for, but this was an event that he actually was very much looking forward to. And so he felt bad that he wasn't able to be with us today. On behalf of the university community, I'd just like to say a word of welcome to everyone who's here, to thank you for attending this special event on immigration. And we gather here this morning as a church that continues to mourn for Pope Francis. I know his loss will deeply inform our discussions today. And yet, in thinking about it, isn't this event a wonderful tribute on behalf of the Holy Father, a pope who worked always on behalf of the poor, the marginalized, the refugee, and the immigrant. With immigrants confronted by closed hearts and closed doors, Pope Francis reminded the world that they are special in the eyes of God. He answered the call of Christ to welcome the stranger Christ said, "For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink, a stranger, and you welcomed me." Now that Pope Francis has returned to the Father, we may feel a vacancy. But rather than a vacancy, perhaps I see an opportunity for each one of us and all of us to stand in the place of our Pope and use his voice to advocate for the immigrant, channel his energy to work for the immigrant, and find his strength to oppose those who act counter to the will of God. I invite us to listen for him speaking into our ears, sustaining us and enlivening our hearts. Pope Francis set an example for us, but thank God he's not the only place we find inspiration. The American church has always been an immigrant church. Seton Hall was founded precisely to educate immigrants who were excluded from society, and we're proud of our legacy of serving newcomers. Our founder, Bishop James Roosevelt Bailey, knew education was key to joining and then leading American society. And with the help of God, we have been performing this vital role for nearly 170 years. As a Catholic university, we also have an obligation to work against those forces of prejudice, and we will continue to do that through our academic initiatives, through the reinforcement of our Catholic mission, and through the continued commitment to promote a better and a more just nation. Today's events will add to the university's rich tradition of engaging with society's most pressing issues, and in doing so, considering how we can act as Christ would have us. I look forward to listening and to learning with all of you. May God bless you for being here today, and may God bless and grant eternal rest unto Francis, and let perpetual light shine upon him. Amen. I want to just formally introduce a person sitting right next to me here. And even though we spell our name the same, we're not related to each other at all. I wish I were. Monsignor Bill Reilly, or Father Bill, as he's known to so many people for generations, really. He was ordained a priest in 1965 and has really served all of his priesthood working for those people who were less fortunate, most especially with the immigrant community. One of the first priests to learn Spanish and to be serving that Hispanic community, the Latino community. He's a wonderful example for all of us about the way Christ manifests his presence in our midst. It's not as separate or above or somehow apart from, but rather in the midst of the community, knowing their needs and serving them to the best of his ability. He's worked tirelessly for decades, helping people with immigration issues to become a regular part of the community here and to be accepted and understood and welcomed into the community. And so Father Bill's perspective is rich, is deep with experience, and it's truly from the perspective of someone who has a pastor's heart. So I'm very happy to welcome Father Bill Reilly. God bless you. Need some help there?
I think Father Reilly said everything I've said, so we can conclude the day. But thank you. It was a privilege to be asked to come, to be able to address this issue, which affects us all, affects our nation, the church. You and I are here because of our interest in those who are in need. Cardinal Tobin, who had to leave, had another job that he was asked to do, to go to pray for the eternal rest of Pope Francis, and eventually, under the guidance of the Spirit, to choose a successor for the Petrine ministry. I'm not a good substitute for him, but I think he would support everything I have to say this morning. Some years ago, there was a book published and the foreword to the book was written by Cardinal Tobin. And it was the speeches, writings of Pope Francis dealing with this very issue that we are looking at today. Today, from legal, ethic, and moral perspective. And Cardinal Tobin wrote the foreword to that book. Unfortunately, I don't know who I gave it to because I never got it back. But he began in a very beautiful way saying, as the pastor of the Green Lady in the harbor, I want to address their needs as the Pope speaks of them. He said, immigration is a drama, and the immigrants are the actors. And you and I probably know or know about others who are suffering today from the fear, hate, and discrimination which is being thrust upon them. Pope Francis wrote, and the Cardinal began his text, the drama. Last May, Pope Francis announced that this year is to be a Jubilee year. We're gathered in Jubilee Hall. He said it's a year of hope. And we, as a church, as a community, are to reflect signs of hope for people in need. The title of the bull that he wrote was taken from the letter of Paul to the Romans, saying, hope does not disappoint. And you and I, by even gathering here this morning, are participating in that year of hope. We are asked to assist others and embrace their way of the cross, forced by violence, who leave their homelands behind in search for a better life for themselves and their families. Their expectations should not be frustrated by prejudice and rejection. We need to offer a spirit of welcome and embrace those who come with the words of the Pope, respect for their human dignity. As we gather and speak of immigrants, we do not add other words about legal status. We speak of people of God, made like ourselves in his image and his likeness. And we are called to respect everyone with a sense of responsibility that no one be denied the right of a dignified assistance. Exiles, displaced persons, only us older people would remember referring to people as DPs from the Second World War. They have come here because of international tensions and were forced to emigrate in order to avoid war, violence, and discrimination. And they should be, the Pope says, guaranteed employment and education that are the needs they have to find their place in a new social context in this country. Hope is born of awareness that people are loved by our church and church members, that we do not abandon but follow people and eliminate prejudice and rejection. A spirit of welcome, not military guards, walls, and concertina wire should be the first thing people meet as they come to our borders. Father Dan Grudy from Notre Dame, a well-known expert on the question of immigration with videos, lectures, had a great book. The book was dealing with immigration. And the question was raised in the book, or he cited a story. The question was raised, when does morning come? When does the dawn begin? First person answered and said, when the rooster crows. No. The second answer, when I can see the silhouettes of the deer so that I can shoot him. No. The third, morning comes, the dawn begins when I can see someone else as my sister or my brother. Today, this morning, may that dawn begin for all of us as we gather here to reflect. The Jubilee calls us to reach out to all. Who do I see? For most, they say, undocumented aliens. In my years in this work, there were 12 million. Now they said the borders were open, and now there are 12 million. 12 equals 12 in my calculation. May we return for a moment to the rationale for our being here today. We are focusing on the moral and ethical question relating to immigration. My position is to help us understand the pastoral dimension of immigration. Why we as church reach out the hand of compassion to others in need. Pope Francis wrote in his document, "Hope does not disappoint. Signs of hope should be present for migrants who leave their homelands behind in search of a better life for themselves. Their expectations must not be frustrated. A spirit of welcome should be reflected by us all. Violence and discrimination should be eliminated. Security guaranteed, with access to employment and education so they can find their place in our society." And Pope Francis continues by saying the Christian community must be prepared to defend the rights of the most vulnerable. In short, we are to consider the needs of our war-torn world. The church, the immigrants, the people fleeing Afghanistan and Syria, Haiti, Central America, and the tyrants of South America. People have a reason for fleeing and need a place to be welcomed. We are to be signs of hope and God's presence in our world. As signs of God's presence, we make him tangibly present, and the Jubilee year is to make that presence real. Pope Francis indicated that the last name of God is mercy. He once proclaimed the Holy Year of Mercy, a long-standing sign of our mercy in our church is found in the spiritual and corporal works of mercy. The teaching of Gospel of Matthew, echoing the teaching of the Jewish Bible, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Moses and his companions were to care for all, including the aliens in your midst. Funding for projects which many non-government organizations and nonprofits have provided assistance are not supplied but long before the government got involved. It's how sad that some consider our reactions to cuts are from selfish motives. Harvard cannot have grants, billions taken away. Other schools who have given in to the administration so that they can be assured of monies. How sad. U.S. aid to people starving in parts of the world has been curtailed. How many times in my experience I was asked by the government to assist people in need? One Christmas Eve, an immigrant was shot. The immigration officers could not go home until they found a place for his widow and children. They turned to us, who were reaching out to the immigrant community. On several occasions, young people, stowaways, one who snuck on a boat with 10 cans of tuna fish in his belt and arrived in Newark, was sequestered, then needed a place for a juvenile, and he lived in our rectory in Jersey City. Another young Dominican was also going to be deported, but he pleaded for one thing, to be able to get a Mother's Day card for his mother and a baseball glove. Perhaps he is one of those Latino baseball players in the major leagues today. But the government looked to the church to be able to provide for the needs of someone. We are asked not to close our eyes to the dramatic situation which surrounds us. The Lutheran pastor, martyr Dietrich Bonhoeffer, asked, and I think if he was here today, he would ask you to look at this question we're considering through the lens of the immigrant, not our own. To look at what should be done from the bottom up and those who are suffering, not for what we think might be good for others. Send them all home. Send the buses to New York and sanctuary cities. Turn the bus around. And right now, the Supreme Court this week has said they cannot send them back without due process, a violation of the basic rights. Isn't it wonderful that our government today gives us a reason for deporting people who are here without documents to other countries without due process? Why? They call upon a law from the 1790s, the Alien War Act. We have not been able to get a new law for immigration. Immigration reform we've heard about over and over again, and it has never happened. The only blessing of recent times was back in 1912 with the DACA legislation, allowing those who had been here from early ages, if they had education, a diploma, or were in school, they would be protected from deportation and given permission to work. DACA is a blessing. But how many of us are aware that every 2 years, that person has to reapply and pay another $485 to stay here? It's a blessing and a curse. I'd like to go back for a moment. I will refer to an article that was written in America magazine. My Jesuit brother here would be proud that I promote America. Last May, the Archbishop of El Paso, Texas, who calls himself the border bishop, father's on the border himself, the border bishop wrote a beautiful article in American saying that there's not a crisis at the border. And he related a story that could be helpful to us all. During the time of the conquest, a young man from Spain came to the New World. He then returned to Spain and was ordained a priest. And the crown sent him back to the New World as a priest. But when he observed the injustices imposed upon the slaves and indigenous people, he became a Dominican priest, like Gustavo Gutierrez, became a Dominican priest to provide for the care. His name, Bartolomé de las Casas. And he became an apostle, in a way, for the first immigrants to the New World. We ask that we might have that same ability, with that lens, to look upon the oppressed people in our midst and find ways for a solution to the difficulties. Right now, we find countless people in our midst living in fear. Yesterday, I was given a ride by a sister, and in her parish, on Good Friday, they would have the Stations of the Cross on the streets around our cathedral in Newark. They were afraid to do it on the streets as done in past years because people would be afraid that ICE would be looking for them. So they stayed right in the area of the cathedral. We deal not just with Latinos, but with people from Asia and from Africa. People live in fear. They don't know what tomorrow will bring. When my father goes to the warehouse to work, will there be a raid? Some don't go to work anymore. Immigration and ICE gather around schools, not just for the children, but for the parents who are picking them up. I don't know if here at Seton Hall, any have suffered by people who have student visas are having them revoked and going to be deported. The Secretary of State very boldly states that when people have come here as student visas and they have bad intentions, we don't want them. Get rid of them, and no right to due process. It's sad what is going on around us, but we sometimes live insulated to the reality from which our people suffer. Are victims of crimes afraid to report them because of fear of retaliation? How do we show compassion for divided families? Oh, your citizen child doesn't have to leave, but you do. Have you met anyone who has prepared papers saying, I place my child in your care in case I have to leave? It's almost like people preparing candles and batteries because of the wildfires that are going on in Lacey and have to evacuate their homes today. People have been asked. In my own experience, I've been asked, not recently, to be able to assist people if they have to leave this country. By evoking that Alien Enemies Act, a law from the 1700s. They're using that, but that was if you were at war. The only war today is the war against the aliens. 41 years ago, the Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago gave an unforgettable speech across the river at Fordham University, not at Seton Hall. And that speech that he gave was built under the title, A Consistent Ethic of Life. And in that speech, he was speaking about the position of our church and the protection of life. And he cited 4 areas: pro-life, against abortion, against capital punishment, against nuclear war, and euthanasia, mercy killing. At the time, only 2 states had legalized suicide, assisted suicide. Now, unfortunately, times have changed. Many states permit that in one way or another. Besides those 4 elements in Cardinal Bernardin's speech, I add immigration for the consistent ethic of life. How interesting it is. That talk that he gave became labeled as the seamless garment of Christ. When we speak of life, we have to include all 5 elements. I once gave one of the immigration judges a copy of that statement of Cardinal Bernardin. 2 nights ago, again, advertised in America magazine, that border bishop gave a talk as part of what they call the Cardinal Joseph Bernardin Lecture. I didn't hear the talk, but if you read the National Catholic Reporter, you will know about his story of leading the protests at the border in defense of the migrants who are here. He gave that lecture, and his topic, you might be aware of that article from last May in America magazine, referred to the crises. And I'm not a language expert. The Chinese people draw 2 characters to speak of crises. One you and I are so familiar with, danger. The other is opportunity. And that character of opportunity is why we gather here today. We remember the psalmist who said, "The Lord hears the cry of the poor." And they are calling out to us, the immigrant community, supported in all the writings of Pope Francis, to extend our hand of compassion, first perhaps in thought, but then in deed. And coming to a situation like this, I don't want this to be an academic consideration. I want it to be something that touches our hearts and we become more aware of the needs of others. 2 movies came out in the last couple of years that I think can help envision our understanding. One, Cabrini, telling the story of this little nun from Italy who was sent to the New World in order to care for the immigrants. Unfortunately, she was given a hard time by the Irish bishop when she got here. Oh, you want to go to, we want Italian Mass. Oh, on Sunday, in the basement, but only once a week. And the work of Mother Cabrini was like that pebble in the water that has spread far and wide. Chicago, Argentina. She has brought that compassion of Christ to that immigrant community. Going back many years, when we lived through the uprising in Newark, the riots of Newark in 1967, it was the Sisters of Mother Cabrini who came to Newark and worked with me, visiting the homes of the oppressed people off Springfield Avenue in Newark. The other movie, horrible, challenging, The Sounds of Freedom, retracing the steps of the poor who have come through the Darien Gap, Colombia, to Panama and the suffering which they endured. Some of the people that we are meeting and serving here right now are people who made that journey. And Father Grudy, many years ago, had a beautiful film on the beast, the train that people would ride from Mexico to the border. We talk about the border. Just to be able to survive what they had was a miracle in itself. The Jubilee year is to be a year of hope. The letter to the Hebrews says that hope is something not yet realized, but something for which we yearn. Something that is still beyond our grasp. I'm tired of hearing about immigration reform. Oh, it's not a crisis. Oh, no. But they say the system is broken. When you go home today, if you have a broken pipe in your house, don't you do something about it? When you go to your car today and find a leaking hose in the engine, you're not going anywhere until you replace it and fix it. I pray that as we reflect today on this whole issue at this university, that we not only think of the legal questions that will follow, but the pastoral teaching that Father will give us, because immigrants are people. So often we hear that word, illegal. Classier, undocumented. You know what illegal is? It's a sick bird. But undocumented, no. See the people of whom we are speaking as victims of a system not ready to embrace and assist them in their need. Remember, when does the dawn come? How do we see it? From your viewpoint today, can you reach out in compassion, the works of mercy? I was hungry, U.S. aid, and you gave me to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me to drink. People are thirsting for hope. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. No longer is it other. It is my sister and my brother. Thank you for the privilege of sharing these thoughts with you.
That talk was really incredible, and I think, Father Reilly mentioned that there was a talk 41 years ago that people wouldn't forget. I think we could all say the same thing about that talk that we just heard. I want to introduce our panel that's coming up, which I'm very, very excited about. And can you hear me okay? Okay, we're going to be having people from the law school who are absolutely wonderful. And first I want to mention is Paula Franzese, who is a dear friend who I've known for many, many years. She is iconic, I guess you could say, at the law school.
Give people about 10 minutes to get coffees with, because I think at 10:30 is when it starts.
Oh, are we moving too fast? Okay.
I don't want to make sure that people who come can get a
Oh,
chance to.
okay. All right. Jonathan just gave me a tip here. We are a little bit ahead of schedule, so maybe before we move into the panel, if people want to get a cup of coffee or tea or use, restroom, whatever you want to do. We'll do that. We'll just, in 10 minutes, we'll reconvene. So, Paula, I'm going to save that beautiful introduction for when we get back. All right. So, in 10 minutes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Nancy, that was the most brilliant
John, is it time to start? Should we start? Like, should we give people
Yes, I'm sorry. I shouldn't be.
Hi, Lori Nessel. So good to see you.
Good to see you.
Great. You've done, so much, but your opinion pieces lately, I've really enjoyed.
I appreciate
I feel like I know you,
because it's a
'cause I'm
very
like,
elastic use of lately. Because I'm just like, I'm sitting there going, oh my god, I had just, the father just asked me like, oh, do you write? I'm like, it's been ages since I had a violin. But I appreciate it.
Could you pass me that water?
Oh my gosh,
Thank
of
you.
course.
Thanks.
Paula said she prepared a few. And then
Forrest, good to see you.
So we're not speaking.
Please.
I mean, you should, if you have something prepared. That was what I had in mind. But,
Okay.
I'll start questions you want to ask me. Ask the moderator.
Okay.
Or don't. It's fine. But if it occurs to you, I want you to feel at liberty.
Yeah.
And so it's one thing when it's like, oh, I'm talking for an hour and I'm outlining it the day before. But when it's something like this,
Yeah. That doesn't matter.
oh my gosh, that dress is awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a gift, and I think it's from. Where's it from? You always see people wearing the same thing, so
Yeah.
it is kind of fun because like no one has it.
And just like that's
I think
a
it's from
zipper.
Stockholm.
Oh my
is where
gosh,
it's from.
yeah, it's so great.
All right, welcome back, everyone. And for our first panel, we have a wonderful set of distinguished speakers, and I'm so excited to introduce them. Two are from the law school, and I first want to mention that the dean of the law school, Juan Weiss, is here, and he has been incredibly supportive of this whole event, so thank you, Juan, so much. So I want to first introduce Paula Franzese, who is the
Morning.
and she is the Peter W. Rodino Professor of Law at Seton Hall Law School. She has been a friend for many years and a wonderful expression of, I think, servant leadership is the way to describe it. Paula is somebody that I know I can send a student to if they're interested in law. She will not only talk to that student, she will invite them to the law school. She will work with them. I've sent two now, and they've raved about her. She received the Teaching Excellence Award from the law school 10 times, and now they've actually named the award after her, which is really quite a statement, and I asked her permission to be able to mention that. So we are so grateful that she is here today. Our second person from the law school is Lori Nessel, professor of law and the director of Immigrants' Rights International Human Rights Law Clinic at Seton Hall Law and Seton Hall Law Detention and Deportation Defense Initiative. I've met Lori for the first time in person today, but we've met virtually. She is truly working on the front lines of this issue. She's working with immigrants, doing the kind of work that Father was just talking about on a day-to-day basis, and we're so grateful that you're here, Lori. Dara Lind is a senior fellow from the American Immigration Council. She is also, was a journalist, and I guess probably most people never stop being a journalist.
Very complicated question.
So that's something we could talk about.
I'd say I'm still a writer, at least.
You're still a writer. You never stop being a writer. That's I guess, the way I would say it. And she used to write for ProPublica and Vox. And we're grateful to have her with us today, and she will have some very interesting and important things to share about the topic of immigration. Our moderator is Jonathan Heaps, who is faculty member in the Corps and a member of the Catholic Studies Center, where he is in charge of the Lonergan Institute. Jonathan and I are good friends, and he is the person who came to me with this idea. I guess it was maybe last summer that you came to me and said, let's... Well, so this has been in the works for a long time, and I'm so grateful to Jonathan for coming up with this wonderful idea. And so he will be the moderator. There will be a time for questions and answers at the end, so please, keep them in your mind and feel free to ask them when the time comes. And so you want to use this microphone? Yeah, okay. I don't know if I can...
It's okay, I'll just snag it right out of here. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Very grateful for your interest in this event and in this topic. Paula has prepared some remarks to begin this panel, and so she'll share those, and then we will have a more conversational panel discussion here at the table when she's finished. So
Excellent. Thank
have
you,
at it,
Jonathan.
please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Hot mic. Thank you. It makes my heart so happy to be here. Out in the vestibule during the last break, Michaela from the Setonian found me and asked, Professor Franzese, why are you here? What are you hoping to get from today's program? And it was such a good question because it centered me for what is now. And I replied, Michaela, what I'm hoping to receive is food for the soul. A reminder that God is so good and people are so good, and that life, amidst all of its disenchantments and hardships and travesties, is beautiful. And hearing the invocation offered by our Monsignor Reilly provided that reassurance. And then that reassurance was multiplied, amplified by the extraordinary message, life, and legacy of Father Bill Reilly, and his words are now tattooed on my heart. My point, we need each other, especially now when there are too many forces endeavoring to convince us that what divides us is far more powerful and bigger than what unites. We have so much more in common than media and countless other forces, toxic forces, would endeavor to suggest. This human heart, it speaks a single language. We all yearn at bottom for the same things: to be seen, to be heard, to be treated with dignity, to be afforded respect, to be given a fair chance at a good life, to understand what it means to live under the rainbow of the blessings of liberty and all of its promises. This human heart of ours is so good if we nurture the good, and yet all that we're fed on a daily basis is the not so good. And so when I spoke with Jonathan, I asked if I might share a few reminiscences about why this moment and this time of revivified vilification of the other, however conceived, is deeply personal to me. I am a child of immigrants. My dad and mom journeyed to this country, my dad for days at a time as a mere teenager with nothing more than the shirt on his back and a copy of the words that he had written in Italian that he had taken from what his third grade teacher had then shared with his class when he was a little boy. The words were the preamble to the United States Constitution. And then he put on the back of this piece of paper, in his beleaguered handwriting, my dad father's family. But my dad kept the words he had written for the last day of his last year receiving an education in the schools. On the back, he had the introductory words. English, as my dad had written them all those decades ago. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain this Constitution for the United States of America. And before that, the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, that we are each endowed innately by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. My dad was one of the countless tens of thousands and millions of immigrants who journeyed in pursuit of that better life. He knew what it meant to be denied the blessings of liberty. His father spoke truth to power, and daring to contest Mussolini's edicts, my grandfather became a political dissident. He was promptly arrested. He was sent to a very remote prison in Italy, and he wasn't heard from for a very long time, notwithstanding his family's efforts to find him, to free him. My dad's family was stripped of all of their belongings, their modest wealth, any hope of an income, and the family was left to endure a life of vilification, hardship, fear of impending arrest for any one of them by association. My dad, by the time he was 18 and made the journey here as a matter of hope and desperation, was in many ways a broken man. And yet he arrived, and as Father Reilly told us, he saw the Green Lady. There she was, the Statue of Liberty. And he said to us, his 4 children, he caught his breath and thought, hope, hope. there she is, hope. We grew up very poor and were vilified in a lot of the ways that the other continues to be. Because of that, we were the kids of the immigrants. We lived in a very small apartment. We didn't have what other kids had. We were made fun of often, but my dad and mom took the brunt of all of that internalized shame. My dad found a job as a longshoreman on the docks, hauling cargo on and off ships. And he then endeavored to work with those who would unionize the workers and receive the bounty of collective action if it ever came. The powers that be and those who had preceded my dad were not pleased at all. And he suffered significantly. He was called all sorts of things. His locker was vandalized. At one point, he was beaten for simply handing out flyers as to how to join a union. I was 6 by that time, and how I adored my parents. And I remember awakening. My dad had come home from double shifts, and I saw his union book. The union had arrived, and it was on the kitchen table, and on it were scrawled all sorts of denigrating exhortations, horrible things, telling him to go home, get back to where you came from, you don't belong here, we don't want you. And I remember crying at the time, and I said to my dad, Papa, my dad did not speak much English, but in Italian, Papa, look at this. And I was such a good student. I had white out. I thought I would white out all of those words. Daddy, you're not this. We have to erase this. And my dad replied, and I didn't understand what he meant at the time. It would take many years for me to know. He said, daughter, those words don't matter because I understand who I am and who you are. You are a child of God. I am a child of God. In this life, people will call you, me, many, many things. But we're not that. We've got to remember who we are. We are not what we are called. Years later, a beloved colleague of mine at the law school shared with me the graffiti-scrawled side of a wall in Eastern Europe. And on the wall were the words in red spray paint, "You are not what you are called. You are what you answer to." That's what my dad was endeavoring to teach me. And that question continues to resonate, I think, every day. What is it that I will answer to? When I was admitted to law school, the first in our family to graduate from high school, to go to college, to go to law school. Oh, my dad. Oh, how he had dreamed of being a lawyer. And that first semester, here I was up at Columbia Law School, my dad, so proud. He asked if he might come with me one day before his shift. By then, he was a waiter, to see what a class was like. And I was thrilled at the opportunity to have my dad with me. So I asked our civil procedure professor the next morning, Professor, might it be possible for my dad, who never had the blessings of a formal education, to come to one of our classes? And this professor looked at me so dismissively, with so much disdain, and simply retorted, "What do you think this is? what do you think this is? I felt so small in that moment. I couldn't bear to tell my dad what the response was, so I delayed and delayed and delayed, getting back to him saying, I'll find out, Dad, I'll find out, Dad. And my dad didn't live much longer. He submitted ultimately to the excesses of a very, very hard life, and a life without the guardrails and safety nets that so many now would endeavor to strip so many of. That question the professor asked reminds me of what I share with my beloved law students today, that life is not happening to us, but for us, even the immense sorrows and disappointments, because that question, what do you think this is front mind in all the 4 decades since I entered the academy. What do I think the academy is? What do I think this law school is? What do I think this system of laws is? What do I think? I think it is anchored in the promise that we are each of us uniquely empowered to narrow the gap between what is and what ought to be, that we are the custodians of the rule of law and the guarantees of due process and equal protection, that we are the reminders to the entire constitution of knowledge, broadly defined. Academics, journalists, teachers, workers, all who labor in what has now become the attention economy. We are the reminders that the rule of law matters, that all that is necessary for tyranny to succeed, as Edmund Burke said all those years ago, is for people of good heart and sound mind to do nothing, to succumb to complacency. What do we think this is? It is an antidote to the cynicism and fatalism and nihilism in some quarters of this daunting moment. What do I think this is? This is an arms wide open enterprise rooted in the promise of inclusivity, centered upon the foundational Christian value that each of us is better than the worst thing we've ever done, and that no one is beyond the promise of redemption, that we are many, many things, but we are certainly more than our mistakes. What do I think this is? Well, I think this gathering is a convention of wizards, of light workers, of people who are here because they're part of a solution. And as I wish, hoping for more nourishment, hoping to be reassured that the catastrophizing and distortions and misinformation and disinformation that is skewing our contemporary lexicon, that would dare to relegate any person to the mere pejorative, the illegals. How dare we abide such discourse? We're so much better than that, and we the people are so much better than that. So this is a moment for collective action. This is a time to be reminded of our better angels, and this is, in many ways, the shot of energy that we need to continue to carry on. Notwithstanding, and I'll let you fill in the ellipses. Why do I persist in feeling what Father Reilly beautifully described as hope, a promise for what could be? Because I'm paying close attention to what bravery looks like right now. I saw it in the defiance of the Academy. I saw it in the letter that was communicated by Harvard University. I saw it in Judge Wilkinson's Fourth Circuit opinion in response to the executive branch's obstinance in abiding the U.S. Supreme Court's edict. Judge Wilkinson was appointed by Ronald Reagan. He is a very conservative jurist, and still he wrote, "The executive will lose much from a public perception of its lawlessness and all its attendant contagions. The executive may succeed for a time in weakening the courts, in lessening our perception of the virtue of our people, but over time, history will script the tragic gap between what was and all that might have been, between what is and what ought to be, and law and time will sign its epitaph." This reminds me of what framer Ben Franklin said at the end of the Constitutional Convention when he was asked, "So, what have you created for our friends across the pond?" And he replied, "A republic if they can keep it." And so I'll close staying anchored in potential solutions. And I've got a quick checklist of those. I'm reminded of Alice Walker, who said that the surest way to be divested of our power is to presume we don't have any. We all have agency, and we can all influence within our spheres of engagement. We're all teachers, and we're all students. We're all caretakers of this great promise, this great social experiment, a democracy in a country that we love so much. So what can we do? This program is a start. I'm the president of the Nancy Enright Fan Club. Everything and anything Nancy does is blessed and enlightened, and good comes from her work. So when she said, "Paula, can you be here?" Anything Nancy asks, I want to move in with her. Anything Nancy asks, I adore this woman. This program. Second, a return to civics teaching at all levels. I see beautiful students in this auditorium. Go back to your schools of origin. You're the success story. We can't be what we can't see. Look at you. Look what you're doing. Members of this esteemed jewel of our beautiful state. Members of this academy, teach civics. Teach third graders all about the First Amendment, all about what due process means, all about what equal protection means. I've been doing this for 28 years now in our local middle school and at Newark's high schools. It's one of the best things I do and the most invigorating. Know Your Rights workshops at churches, synagogues, mosques, senior centers, junior centers. We should all be journalists. We're going to hear from Dara shortly, and immense credit to the fourth state. We should all be journalists. We should all be truth tellers. We should all bear witness to suffering, so much suffering of the moment, and speak of it truthfully and authentically. Take charge of our media feeds. Doom scrolling is real because algorithms conspire to keep us in ideological silos. Cultivate viewpoint diversity, vantage point diversity, to build bridges. Our Holy Father, those who would build walls and not bridges, are not Christians. To build bridges, to move beyond that which we believe by the reductive news feeds of ours would divide us. Teach the power of proximity by practicing it. This program, continuing to show up, continuing to engage in person, away from the screens. And I'll close by noting that while my dad did not live long enough to know what that promise of a good education and the blessings of liberty might yield for his children, I know that he does know. And when he said to me, somewhat prophetically, earlier in the day that he unexpectedly passed, he said, "Our lives are shaped most not by what we take. Everyone is greedy and trying to take so much. Our lives are shaped most by what we leave behind. We are our father's children, our mother's children, our grandparents' grandchildren, our ancestors' descendants. We are the products of all of the strife and turmoil and excesses of history that revealed the lesser angels of this mighty republic. And we are also the descendants and recipients of a great promise, a republic, if we can keep it. And so it is with open heart and mind that I say thank you to all of the light workers, all of the angel humans who conspired to make this program real. And I say thank you to all of us gathered here for the opportunity to remember that although it will feel this way, we are actually never walking this path alone. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to turn, you ended on a practical note. So I'd like to turn to you, Lori, and ask you about, you're the director of a law clinic. Could you tell us a little bit about, for people who might not know, I didn't until I married an attorney. It's turned out really well for me. What a law clinic is, what your law clinic focuses on.
Sure.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. Can you hear me? Okay. I don't know if I need this. Right, so I have been at Seton Hall's law school for 30 years now, always focused on immigration. So in addition to teaching immigration in the classroom, I serve as director of our Immigrants' Rights International Human Rights Clinic. And what that means is that law students in their final year of law school get the opportunity to really be out there in the trenches on the front lines representing immigrants. So they're serving as the lawyers, and I and my colleagues are closely supervising them. So within our clinic, we have the clinic students doing this work, and I can tell you a little bit about that. And then we also have what's like a big legal services office within the Immigrants' Rights Clinic now. It's funded by the state. And it's called the Detention and Deportation Defense Initiative. There are 4 organizations. Thankfully, Seton Hall and the Immigrants' Rights Clinic are one of them. And so through that program, what we do is we try to use like a merits blind system, like a public defender type system, and just go out there and represent as many detained immigrants as we can, with the idea being that when anyone has something as important as deportation from this country, separation from their family, their home, their jobs, from everything they've built here, and oftentimes forever, right? Before they're gonna be banished, they have a right to due process and to have the best representation they can, regardless of the strength of their case, right? It's really about treating people with dignity and making sure that their rights are protected. So we have a number of lawyers, law students can work there, doing that work. In the clinic, again, like I say, I've been doing this for 30 years, and up until, I should have kept track of when it stopped, But there were many, many years that we had a perfect track record. And I used to say it's all about, for the law students, being relentless lawyers. And so we didn't win at the first stage necessarily, but if you were good and committed and creative, like our students are, eventually you could win your case. Eventually, you wear the government down. And they're like, I just don't want to file one more brief because these crazy clinic students are not going to give up. And eventually, we won all our cases, except for a couple of clients that were detained and couldn't stay detained anymore and chose to go back. Those days are clearly over, right? And so now we do different things. We still represent people and we still give it our all. And we still do win some cases. Students won asylum for a human rights activist from Chad who was just fighting for internet access for people in Chad. The government shuts it down for years at a time. And he was arrested and he was tortured and he managed to flee here and he wants to do amazing things with his life. We were able still, a few weeks ago, to get him asylum. Yesterday, students were in court representing an indigenous woman who basically from when she was 12 years old, her mother essentially sold her. And from 12 years old until now, she has suffered ongoing abuse, rape, I mean, just horrible, sort of passed from one abuser to another. And so we go into court and we do everything we can do, even if it might not fit perfectly with the law, but we're trying to like push the law to be more inclusive of the types of harms that people are fleeing, why people are trying to get to this country. And so we're still in court, we're still representing people, but like Paula mentioned, I mean, know your rights is also really important. We do a lot of going out. Students go out, they do in English, in Spanish, in French. Know your rights presentations. Make sure people know where they are, whether it's a house of religious worship, a school, a hospital. Get in there and make sure people know that they do still have rights and what they can do. And some of it's really depressing, you know, like having to help a mother do a power of attorney so she can sign over who's going to take her kids when she's deported. That's really hard to do, but it's really important because it's part of being prepared. It's part of what people want, right? As a good parent, you want to have a plan for your children's safety. And when ICE goes in and picks people up, as we know from the news, they're not paying any attention to people's due process rights, to are the kids left at home. So with the client I mentioned yesterday, you know, they put her on an ankle monitor. And we went yesterday to try to get her ankle monitor removed. And we're sitting there in an ICE office full of brown women carrying a baby. Not everyone had a baby, but so many mothers all tagged with this horrible monitoring device on their leg, like completely humiliating, right? And it's like all of this is happening. Thankfully, we were able to get her monitor off, and she was so happy. And she said when she goes home, her little boys, who are permanent residents, are going to be so happy because when she leaves the house, they never know if she's coming back. And then, I don't want to talk for too long, but it's, you know, it's just a lot of these kinds of things. It's accompanying our clients to their check-ins with ICE, where sometimes it goes okay, but sometimes people are taken. We had a client recently, let's give one more example, another domestic violence victim that we've been representing for years, and she lost before the judge. We tried to get her out on bond so she could be with her children. We were denied. She was detained. She was sent far away, very far away, to another detention facility, but within the United States, a really bad facility. And she has a right to an appeal, right? So under immigration law, there is no deportation order until the Board of Immigration Appeals creates one. Right? So if a judge denies you the right to stay in this country, you have a right to appeal. And there can't be a final order unless you waive that right or unless you try and you brief it and you lose. Well, we're representing her. She has her appeal pending. We get the briefing schedule to continue with the appeal, try to speak to the client. She's gone. Where is she? Has she been moved to another facility? Back to the country where she fears for her life. Now, in that case, right, and again, it took some time trying to track her down, then trying to figure out, is there any place she can be safe back in the country that, she thought we would be her surrogate protector, right? And that's what America was supposed to do for people whose countries fail to allow them to live safely. They have a right under domestic law and under international law to ask that we protect them. They don't have a right to win their case, but they have a right to try. And Congress has set up a system. She was sent back. Thankfully, hopefully, the government has said they'll bring her back. So as we know from the news, that's not always what's said, but thankfully they say, because again, it was an error. Legally, there was no way to send her back. So they say they're going to bring her back. They insist she stay detained, but she can be here for the pendency of her proceeding. It has yet to happen, and we hope it'll happen. But it's like things like this, and it's law students, really, obviously we closely supervise them, but it's an amazing opportunity for law students to really learn, not in the classroom, but by serving as lead counsel in these cases. And students are incredible. I mean, yesterday was our last day of classes at the law school. And I felt so bad I missed my last clinic class because we were in court and with two of the students. But, talk about, an amazing way to learn and to be doing something and seeing the power of being a lawyer and, regardless of how hard it is, like what you need to do and how you can give something your all.
Just very, very quickly, what being up this close to these cases and working with this client community, what do you hear back from your students about their experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. They love it. I think they uniformly love the experience, but it's definitely hard. So we do things like we spend a fair amount of time bringing in like mental health professionals and talking about things like vicarious trauma, right? And trauma focused interviewing and things like that, because it's just hard to see it. And like this case yesterday, my students were saying to me, like, Professor, are they going to come into the courtroom and take our client away? And I have to say, maybe. If that happens, that's why we've got the power of attorney. We'll see what we can do. We'll fight against it. We'll see if we can get her out on bond. But yeah, and when we were walking to the courthouse, we saw so many marshals and police and ICE officers, and you don't ever know. That's the problem. You're always nervous. When we sat in the ICE office and everyone else was taken in except for us, and I'm thinking, what does this mean? Why are they waiting? And I feel like it's a fine line in this world, right, between being like a strong advocate and maybe being paranoid. I don't know if you can be paranoid when so much bad stuff is happening, but I felt like as we walked down the corridor, I'm like, like looking constantly, like just you never know what's going to happen. So students were ecstatic with the results. In this case, we were able to get the judge to close the deportation proceedings. And she has another visa that's pending and another way to legalize herself here. And we got her ankle monitor off and got her done with her reporting. So then that's wonderful, but it is stressful. There's no doubt it's stressful for the students. Yeah.
Dara, I want to turn to you. You are now at the American Immigration Council, and you're a senior fellow there. Could you tell us a little bit about what that organization does and what you do there? And I'll have other questions about being a writer, but I want to start with that.
Sure, thanks, and thanks to everyone for being here, for showing up, and for providing some, I think, like flesh and blood to to stuff that I usually think of as kind of ink and paper. So the American Immigration Council, DC-based national organization that does advocacy kind of along the spectrum for immigrants and for a welcoming America. So I'm usually working with our federal policy team, which means a whole lot of, answering questions from congressional staff, providing fact sheets so that the public can Google loves us, which is great, because I would much prefer that when somebody Googles how to get asylum in US, that you see our fact sheet rather than, somebody who's trying to put misinformation out there. But we also have a state and local team that's doing a lot with getting local chambers of commerce to stand up for immigrants' rights. And, a litigation team that has been kind of both directing resources of other lawyers out there, and also picking our own legal battles with when are we going to be the ones going up against the government in court on some of this stuff. So it can be a little hard to pull together, but a lot of it is thinking about this conversation not just as something that's happening within government, but also something that involves the public, that involves people in various communities who have the ability to work from their positions of power. And so I've been there for a couple of years now, as my title is senior fellow, and doing some outside writing still, but also working with our folks so that if we're putting all of this effort into putting a publication out there, are we sure that it's going to reach the broadest audience possible? Have we thought about, what we want this to do? Can we make sure that we're not just doing a lot of work, but also continuing to bring the public along and to educate them? Because, as you've seen over the last, even just 5 years, immigration is either the thing in the news or nobody cares about it. But when it's the thing in the news, everyone's first question is, how did we get here? Which means that you do have to have that knowledge banked up and be able to say, well, while you guys weren't paying attention, we were, and here's where we were.
I want to ask you to expand a little bit on that. I became aware of your work when you were working at a place that was famous for providing explainers, and I'm curious about how you think about communication both to the general public and to civil society, as well as communicating to specialized audiences, whether it be a legal audience or a policy legislative audience. How on this issue do you approach providing that context? How do you think about setting the aperture for context and history so that it's not just whatever the latest, hottest headline is?
I mean, it's genuinely hard, right? Because if, both of my co-panelists are immediately going to, the totally understandable and correct instinct to humanize this issue by telling individual stories, by talking about individual cases, by talking about our own families. And that is essential to making sure that we're not talking about people as objects. But it also can be really hard to draw the connections between an individual case and what is the system that produced this case? Both because immigration law is famously complex, and if you talk to lawyers who practice in other areas who thought in 2017 that they would kind of dip their toes into immigration law and do a little work pro bono, and came out of those, those orientations what have I done? But also just because, it's not a very easy thing to look at a human being and to simultaneously see them as someone on whom a system can operate. But of course, that's how law works. That is, people are the law is a system by which the government tells people to comply with it. So it can be really difficult to help people understand that, rather than just making them feel like the detail is overwhelming and they don't need to learn anything, which is of course, going to be counterproductive, because if you don't learn anything, you can't do anything to advocate for change, or you certainly can't make sure that what you're doing is going to help. So it requires a lot of, trusting people to have a certain amount of patience. One of the kind of fundamental differences between explanatory journalism as people who are doing it understand it, and traditional, Associated Press style, here's what happened yesterday, is that you have to believe that walking people through the background before you get to what just happened, that they're gonna come with you, right? Because like, if you just tell them what happened yesterday and they have no idea what happened before then, that's not at all helpful, but it does take a little more time and a little more patience, and you have to, you know, you have to kind of just lay stuff out there and hope that people will be willing to read it. But it also, when you're trying to write not just for the general public, but also for practitioners, because when you're talking about here's what the Supreme Court just ruled on, you have people literally in, you know, you have like folks like the students here at the clinic who are in courtrooms who want to know, what does this mean for my client who is in court today? And so, you know, that you need to be able to communicate things in a way that doesn't just use legal jargon, because then the general public can't understand it, but that also isn't misleading to somebody who does know the law. And this is something that happens really, like, it's very easy to accidentally use a word that actually has a policy meaning. So you have to understand it, and you also have to, you know, in a newsroom context, pick fights with editors over it by like, yes, I know that you think this word is a synonym for this other word, but you've actually just told a bunch of immigration lawyers that this totally different thing is going on. And bearing both of those in mind is, I mean, it's a lot. It means that there are other things that like have to fall by the wayside sometimes, because if you're doing that and you're also grounding everything in an individual story, that means that things get even longer. It's much easier to just tell the story and not bother to abstract it back to the system. And so figuring out how to do things in a way that is going to be humanizing, that's going to, you know, help people kind of connect to the issue, but also help them understand it, is not the easiest balance.
Thank you. Paula, I wanted to ask you about one thing that, among your many accolades that I don't recall being mentioned, is that you work in the area of government ethics. I do. And have done a great deal of scholarship in that area. And you also, in your opening remarks, invoked Judge Wilkinson's opinion, which is, I think, fair to say, elegaic, maybe? I mean, really points to the gravity of a particular moment in terms of the government's response and the executive's interaction with the courts. How, as someone who has specialization in government ethics, how are you reacting to the way that policies are being enacted by the government in this moment and at this time?
Yeah, thank you. You know, it's such a resonant question, and in a word, it is dismaying. Character counts, integrity matters, and as a polity, as a voting republic, we've got to be invested in putting character on the ballot, but also be reminded that people are angry. People are very angry. And for a number of reasons, so many in this country have felt left out and left behind and delegitimized in their own spheres. I think that has a lot to do with the ways in which the academy has been vilified. And maybe some of the reductive rhetoric is attributable to certain ideological orthodoxies that would endeavor to divide us between oppressor and oppressed. Which one are you? When every fraught issue, every issue contains multitudes. So what I endeavor as a government ethicist is to be more reflective rather than reactive in response to a particular exigency or urgent question posed about the propriety of a particular course of conduct, but also avoid the binary and see more of a heterodoxy. I think also, in terms of the call to good government, I'm heartened by what's happening locally and on a statewide basis in town halls and in places of worship throughout the country, in elected officials' home offices. People are turning out, and people are demanding more from their elected officials. And I see promise in the First Amendment, and that's an understatement. I see an urgency to upholding the guardrails that would assure the sustainability of the First Amendment. And as an ethicist, what I know for sure is that just because you have a right to do something or proclaim you have some ill-established right to do something doesn't mean it's the right thing to do.
Thank you so much. Lori, along the same lines, I wonder about how you see, so one of the subtitles for this is local and national. And on the national stage, this is a bit of a in the weeds legal question, but I think it might be helpful to talk about this moment, especially in light of the government ethics question, is that, you know, government lawyers enjoy what is called the presumption of regularity, and one of the things that's reflected in Judge Wilkinson's opinion is the breakdown of the presumption of regularity. And in the very high-profile cases, and in very high-profile cases, period, do you foresee that transforming the dynamic that your students will encounter when they go into immigration courts, or will these simply be idiosyncratic, high-profile cases, or will this change the dynamic in immigration courts?
Yeah, it's a great question, one that's really hard to answer. I feel like any future-oriented question is now like, who knows? It's really hard, right? Because it just seems like every day you wake up to some new executive order that's changing everything, or a policy, and it's really, yeah, and within immigration court, for people that want to be immigration lawyers, I mean, there also have been, you know, there's a lot of firings of immigration judges, of the members of the Board of Immigration Appeals. So certainly the nature is changing. I think, you know, a number of judges are fearful, and of course that's not a good thing, right? Because these judges don't have the type of protection or tenure that other judges have. And so I do think it all really seeps in. I was really pleasantly surprised yesterday when we were in court, because there had just been, like the day before, this new memo saying that, I'm gonna get too technical, put everyone to sleep, but there's something that a judge can do that's called like administratively closing immigration proceedings. And from an immigration lawyer's perspective, that's really good, because what that means basically is, like, let's say you have a client who is seeking asylum in court, right? If the judge administratively closes the proceedings, then it could be reopened either by the government, but also by your client. So maybe if, let's say, someone is like married to a US citizen, right? Or they have a work visa coming or something else, it kind of gets them out of proceedings, but they're not giving up what they're seeking before the court. So then there was this memo, right, saying that scathing about judges are abusing this and it should never be done, and, you know, just how horrible it is. And it's like page after page of, like, you know, really scathing commentary. But then at the end, and you always have to read all these things to the end, because at the very end it says, however, the regulation is still in place. So it's like, okay, so the message to judges is, don't do this, because we hate that you do this, but they can do it. And so yesterday our judge did it, and he referenced the memo, but he found there were, like, extraordinary circumstances in our case. So, like, that was heartening, you know, that some judges, even, like, he clearly had gotten the memo, but still thought there was room to do this.
Thank you. Dara, how do you manage, and can you think of some examples of where a high-profile case may or may not be representative of what you view as the really neuralgic or salient systemic or policy issues in the immigration space?
So, I mean, it's a good question, and I actually tend to think about it more as stuff that's really aberrational versus stuff that is, you know, an extreme assertion of something that the government often has, because one of the, kind of underlying truths of immigration law is that tie goes to the government a whole lot of time, right? Like they have a lot of discretion, and there isn't a whole lot of, oversight or like counterbalance to that.
Could
and
you
so,
unpack that distinction you made between extreme and aberrational?
Oh yeah, I just like, is there something something like the case of Kilmar Burgo Garcia, right, who had a specific order from a judge saying he could not be deported to El Salvador, and then got deported to El Salvador, and now the government is saying they can't get him back. That is an unusual set of circumstances. That is not something that happens in general, and when it does happen, the government has traditionally said, yes, we made a mistake, and then the question is, and given kind of extended some sort of responsibility to fix the mistake. So the government kind of grinding down and saying, no, actually we don't have to do anything, and maybe it wasn't a mistake at all because we fired the attorney who said that it was a mistake in court, like that is aberrational. That's not something that we usually see. Something like the students whose student visas are being revoked, on the other hand, is we don't usually see it, but it's not a violation of the law. It's not something that there was anything saying they couldn't do. It's that it's a power that government doesn't traditionally exercise, but that was given to the executive branch. Like, a lot of immigration law was written during the Cold War, right? So there's a lot of stuff in immigration law that says, well, unless they're a communist. If they're a communist, you can do whatever you want to them. And other things that are not that explicit, but that do assume that, yeah, sometimes the government is going to have to go beyond what we consider to be reasonable in terms of protecting, First Amendment guarantees in order to advance the foreign policy interests of the United States. That's a power the government has had in its pocket, and that either it used sporadically in the case of the Cold War or hasn't really used, and now it is using on a regular basis. And so it's not something we've seen before, but it's an expression of something that they had always had the power to do. And the question is just, how much do we, getting back to, the ethics questions, is the character of people in government that they say, well, we can do this, and therefore it is permissible for us to do it whenever possible? Or is it such that they say, well, the law allows us to do this, but the law anticipates that we will be restraining ourselves from using it too often. So when is it in our judgment important to use this power versus, when should we be restraining ourselves from doing something that we're not prohibited from doing?
Thank you so much. We're starting to run low on time, but I do want to reserve some time for questions if anybody has some. We have about 10 minutes or so. There will be a class in here at noon, so we will have to shuttle out at some point. But if anyone who's here has a question they'd like to ask, I believe this is being streamed, and so if you would come up to one of the microphones so that the people on the stream can hear you, I would appreciate that. Or if mobility is an issue, I can run out with this as well. And if you would tell us your name when you ask your question too, please.
So my name's Reilly Gonzalez, and my dad's an immigrant. He's since become naturalized, but I wanted to know if there's any way that they can denaturalize a naturalized U.S. citizen for the purposes of these deportations that they're currently conducting.
If you're, I will speak if you can't speak as a lawyer without speaking as a lawyer, but yeah, you should totally do that.
Okay. So technically, right, even putting aside the climate now, but there is a process in the law, in the Immigration Nationality Act, for denaturalization. So it is, like I always tell my students in class, anything that's given to you when it comes to immigration can be taken away. Historically, that's almost never, ever done. Really, those cases were largely brought, like a prototypical case of denaturalization would be when it turns out that there is, a very old immigrant who it turns out was like a guard at a Nazi concentration camp. And he lied about that when he got his first visa, right? There are cases like that. They're really where it takes them years and years, and then the person is, most of these cases, obviously these guys are really, really old, but there's a proceeding to denaturalize them so that they can deport them. I don't teach it. I took it out of my syllabus for my immigration and naturalization class because it's so rare to be denaturalized. So short answer is, you said it's your father? Yeah, like I don't think that people need to be worried about denaturalization today. Or I'd put it very low on the triage scale of things to worry about, but it is technically possible.
I just want to add a couple of quick things, which is that the Trump administration, the first time around, made a big deal about, we're going to start a denaturalization task force, and they're going to go through all of these old cases and find out who can be denaturalized, and then we're going to go do it. And they did bring some cases. But like, the amount of hype paid to, they're going to have a denaturalization task force, compared to the number of cases that they actually even tried to bring, was wildly disproportionate. And I actually heard gossip from inside the government from somebody who had talked to somebody who was assigned to one of these task forces, and they said, yeah, it's the easiest job I've ever had, because like the law's really clear, so there's just not a lot we can do. And so, you know, I think that there's a lot of what the administration is doing is trying to get people to remain afraid enough so that they don't take advantage of like their full scope of rights, right? So that they like deport themselves, or so that they don't go for protections that they'd be eligible for. And I think that this is a really good example, because while I can't speak for any individual case and someone should consult a knowledgeable immigration lawyer, it's really, really hard in the abstract to ever say that you're safer not being a citizen than you are being a citizen. And so focusing on naturalization, while we can denaturalize you, yeah, the government can also strip your green card. And it can strip your green card for a lot more reasons than it can denaturalize you. And so I think that it's important to think about, you know, yes, that's something the government can do, but in terms of comparison to, are you less safe for going for this thing? That's a totally different question.
And I'll add, I see the worry on your face, and you should not have to live every day with that worry. It's palpable as I have the honor of seeing you and hearing you, and I am so sorry for that. And lawyer me would ordinarily say not to worry, and thinking me says not to worry, but present moment me says, let's just make sure when we get to the break that I introduce you to Professor Lori Nessel, who is one of the best lawyer teachers and learned, beloved professors at our school. So if you have a question moving forward, we love Lori so much because she is a light keeper for us all. And Professor Nessel is here for you too, and for your dad.
Thank you for your question. Yes, please, come on. And this will be our last question so that we can finish somewhat on time.
Good morning, and thank you very much for your time. My name is Christopher. I am a junior journalism major, sociology minor. It's a bit of a twofold question for me. First, is there any sort of legal grounding for the administration's targeting of international students by ideological means, such as by scanning their social media posts or otherwise monitoring their participation in protests? Or is this just some of the kind of open defiance that was spoken of earlier about the administration behaving in an exceptional way that was not expected? And secondly, there is a lot of talk on social media about how these laws are being passed with the idea that, because quote-unquote illegal aliens or permanent residents, since they are not full U.S. citizens, are not fully protected by U.S. law, so to speak, in kind of that common parlance, and that the pernicious rumors are, so to speak, that they're that the administration is slowly chipping away at these in order to get to U.S. citizens at the end, kind of this very morbid narrative that the U.S. is becoming some form of authoritarian regime. So, how real is that from a legal point of view and from a political point of view? Yeah, those two questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take the second one first, just because I don't want to accidentally commit law by saying on the student visa question that something is unequivocally illegal. It's really hard to say that something if I say that, then it'll turn out that I'm wrong in some particular. But like, as far as they're eroding this so they can go after citizens next, I'm of two minds about this, because on the one hand, I think it's really important, given how much pride most Americans take in the idea that America is a nation of laws and a nation that was like built on the Declaration and the Constitution and the guarantees of certain rights. I think it's important to point to something and say, look, either something is a universal right or it isn't. And they're currently saying it's not a universal right. And it's also important to use this as an opportunity to educate about the importance of these rights. Like, the fact that Joe Rogan is out here saying the reason that we have due process is so we can know if you're a criminal or not, so you can't say that criminals don't deserve due process, that is a very good articulation of why that's a universal right, and I'm very glad that it's happening. But at the same time, I think that often what's meant by this, they're doing this so they can go after citizens, the undercurrent of that is, and therefore you should get out in the streets today because it could be you tomorrow, and so you should fight while you still have the chance. And I'm sympathetic to that. But I think that also a lot of people have other things that they want to accomplish with their lives other than picking fights with the government. And I think that a lot of people here, they're doing this so they can go after citizens and think, if I do this now, I'm making myself a target. And so if they succeed, they'll go after me next. And I think that the odds of that are not inevitable enough that it's worth it for people to shut themselves down now. I think it's really that there are very meaningful differences in the law, like when the government detains a U.S. citizen, they release them. It's bad. They shouldn't do it at all. There are cases where U.S. citizens are deported and then the government recognizes there's a mistake and brings them back. But they're not doing that for people who they're detaining who don't have legal status. They're saying, I'm sorry. Well, they're not saying I'm sorry anymore. They're just saying, too bad, we can do it to you. And so understanding those differences and it can be a way of understanding that not everybody would be able to speak out right now. And U.S. citizens can, and for the foreseeable future will still be able to, and so they shouldn't use the fact that it could be them at some future point as an excuse.
Just couple very brief follow-ups. I'd like to end in about 3 minutes if we can. No, not at all.
Follow-up questions?
Go ahead. No. I just want, if you wanted to say more.
Oh,
we have
sure.
about 3 more minutes.
Yeah, no, I agree with what Dara said. I think, though, so on the student visa question, and I think you mentioned this in an earlier answer, right? Like there are, immigration law is kind of all about trying to balance a lot of competing policies. And one of those, right, and they're all totally inconsistent, right? But one of them is foreign policy, and another one is national security. And there are lots of others. So canceling student visas, it's been done before. It can be done. It's not it's not illegal on its face, but there are also First Amendment rights. And we have good case law that non-citizens have also First Amendment rights. Lawful permanent residents have First Amendment rights. And so, we'll have to see what comes out of the courts, I think, in terms of the litigation on that. Just on the second piece, I do think that it's important that citizens feel like not just, oh, this is happening to immigrants, but this is, the first step. And as history shows, it can go much further than that. And I do think that we should all be really afraid and really want to protect what matters to us in terms of democracy, due process. But I agree that I don't think that fear means we shouldn't do anything, because I do agree those of us that are citizens have the privilege of having a lot more protection, but I think we're all feeling afraid in different ways. Maybe it's not that we'll be deported if we're U.S. citizens, but as lawyers, I think it's scary, right? As professors, like in lots of ways, federal workers, I mean, people are being harmed in so many ways, regardless of immigration status.
Thank you so much for your question. Please join me in thanking our panel. So there will be another panel this afternoon, but in about 10 minutes there will be Mass as well. Father Jerry Bonapane will be presiding over Mass there. If you want to stay and chat, please do so out in the lobby area. There's a class that's coming in here in about 10 minutes. So we're happy to hang and chat with you for a few minutes, but please do so out by the coffee and the tea.
The Mass is in the main chapel across the green, and the panel this afternoon is in the University Center in the event lounge. Okay.
I've been trying to accompany her, so I was checking for months. Oh.